But before we go any further, let's go to the whiteboard.
Well, we did.
Like, what are you erasing?
Cool.
All right, yeah.
Now, Ram really goes down the rabbit hole when it comes to leather. He knows everything there is to know about how the different types of leather are created.
All right, so we're at the whiteboard. Why are we here?
Okay, so before we understand, in order to get into the products, I think it's important to understand the material and the surface we're going to be working on, right? And I think there's so many different types of leather. I think a lot of people have certain ideas, but you can classify the different types of leather based on the animal it comes from. But I think with what we do, that's not that important, but I think it's more important to understand the different parts of the skin or the hide, how they're finished. That is what gives us different types of leather, right? And once you understand that, it'll become so much easier to understand why we have certain products to do certain things.
Yeah.
So I always think as just a basic knowledge, it's really important to understand what is the surface, how it's made,
Yeah.
you know, what does it consist of, and that's what I want to show everyone.
Okay, yeah, let's get to drawing. And this is
Cool.
way more than you need to know about leather, but it's good information to know, because as a detailer, you need to know all these little nuances, all this like background information. Not that you're going to explain all this to your customer, but at least you have it in the back of your mind, so if the question comes up, you know it. So, all right, let's get into it.
Cool. So obviously we know that leather is a natural material, durable material. Something that's important to also understand in the current day and world is that leather is a byproduct. We are not killing animals because we want to have more leather seats and leather handbags, right? It's the meat industry, the cattle industry that drives the leather industry, right? The leather is a byproduct. What the skin and the hide, what otherwise would have been a waste material, would have just been thrown away. We repurpose that into making leather that is a material that lasts a very, very long time.
True.
Right? So I think that's important to understand. Now,
Excellent.
I'm just going to draw leather viewed in cross section. Okay. So imagine this here is leather, right? That's the animal. This would have had like hairs on the surface, right? Animals would have a lot of hairs. It would have animals probably rubbed against barbed wire fencing at some point.
Scars.
It's gotten into fight
cuts.
with other animals. It's got a lot of scars and whatnot on the surface, right? Now, so this side here effectively becomes the grain side. Does that make sense? So this is where you see the texture on the surface on leather, what we see, right? That's the grain side, right? And then right at the other end, right, the lower part is you've got fibers, right? So if you look at suede, the back of suede, it's got a lot of these fibers, and most of these fibers are quite horizontal, right? And this part here is called the flesh side, right?
So is that the inside?
Yes. So if this was, when this was an animal skin, this part here is what's attached to the animal, and you've then got the hairs and you've got the grain, just like our skin. So that's the flesh side, right? So the fibers on the flesh side, right down. So when leather's just, so this is just the skin from the animal, right?
Yeah.
This is the part that's attached to the flesh. That's here is the grain. Lower down, once leather is made, assuming that this whole piece of hide is quite thick, right? And that can vary depending on what animal it's sourced from, where that animal is. But we're just, for the purposes of our understanding and for this video, we're going to assume that this hide or this piece of leather is quite thick.
Yeah.
Right? So you've got the flesh side, and the fibers down here are quite further away from each other. But as you start going up, right, they start getting a bit closer. It's a denser structure, right? And then as you keep going further up, it's, you know, you've got things going in various different directions, right? Becomes a very, very dense, tight structure to the point that you almost can't see, right? But this dense structure is what gives leather its tear resistance. So leather is not like paper. You can't just tear it off, right? It's quite difficult, and that's because it's a very, very dense, tight structure, right? And a lot of this is literally just protein and collagen fibers that are used. Okay. Now, how is leather made? In the olden days, leather would be sourced from, or skins and hides would be sourced from a local slaughterhouse, right? So the meat would obviously go to the meat industry and whatnot, and the skins and hides would be sent off to a tannery.
Yeah.
Tannery is where leather is made, and the process of tanning is literally just converting those raw hides and skins from the raw state to the finished material we call leather. That process is called tanning.
Cool.
Okay. So imagine what happens, right? Slaughterhouse, they've slaughtered the animals. Now the skins and hides would come into the tannery in two forms. They'd either be covered in salt, right, just to stop the decaying and the putrefaction process, or they'd come frozen, right? Usually the frozen stuff just goes into a chill room or like a freeze room, and that gets used later on. But whatever comes covered in salt, right, that goes straight into production in the tannery to make leather.
Cool.
Right? So step one, they get rid of the salt, right? Step two, all the hides are soaked in a special solution of that basically what that does is it's the process is called liming and unhairing, and essentially what they do is they increase the pH level of the skin, which causes all these hides to swell up, right? And when they swell up, what happens is all these hairs literally just fall off because the pores open up, right? And the hairs just fall off.
Okay.
Right? That's how they get rid of the hairs.
Cool.
Right? But it's a very delicate process. The whole balance has to be right, because if you use aggressive chemicals and if the timing of it's not right, you can etch the skin, you can leave marks and things like that.
Okay.
Right? So that's your process called liming and unhairing. So they've gotten rid of all the hairs now, right? That's all completely gone, right? Now, it goes through the tanning process, right? There can be synthetic tanning, vegetable tanning, and various sort of other tannings. Chrome tanning is also a popular tanning method, but I think again, keeping it simple and getting to the point, right? Assuming this whole thing is quite thick, this whole hide goes into a drum filled with dyes, right? So what do you think, if I was to ask you what's the difference between dye and pigment or dye and paint?
Oh, yeah.
Dye is almost like ink.
Yep.
Dye penetrates through the pores, right? So all these pores are completely open, right? So the hairs are gone, these pores are open. So dye penetrates all the way through, right? So if they're gonna make red leather, right, they would use red dye.
Yep.
Right, so you've got all the way through.
The whole thing would be dyed red.
That's it, right? Okay. Now, the other thing with dye is dye does not have the same level of covering power. So it's got sort of uneven, it's almost sort of a little bit patchy, right? Whereas when you paint a surface, paint stays on the surface and you get a solid surface, right? Solid color, right? So once this is dyed, depending on how thick this hide is, one of the first things they'd do is they would slice this whole hide, right? And what they then do is all these imperfections, like the scars and things like that, they'll sand that down. They'll fill it using a leather filler, right? And they'll then spray a layer of primer, right? Which is just like an adhesion promoter, just to make the surface really sticky. They would then spray paint or pigment, right?
Yep.
And what do you think? Any surface that's had paint or pigment, what does it need to protect?
Some sort of protection, some sort of coating, sealer.
Exactly. So that thing, clear coat, in leather terms referred to as top coat, obviously. That's what goes on. And at some point, this leather is pushed through a roller, which artificially embosses the grain structure on it. Because once you've filled and painted, obviously there's not an even grain structure around it, right?
Yep.
And that's what consumers want.
They want that grain, they want that texture.
They want that grain, and they want the uniform grain structure. They don't want to see any scars in the back of their seat, right? Everyone wants the uniform, so that's what happens.
Cool.
Right? And this type of leather is called pigmented leather, right? Now, one of the characteristics of pigmented leather is that when you paint, right, paint stays on the surface, so it ends up filling all these pores, right? So while earlier it was completely porous, this leather now is no longer porous and absorbent, right? So it makes it easier to clean, easier to look after, right? And it lasts a long time,
Very
right?
cool.
And that leather is what you'd see a lot in cars.
Okay.
Right? That's pigmented. Now, the other end of the spectrum, if nothing's done to it, right? Literally, the imperfections are considered to be part and parcel of the character of the leather, right? And that type of leather is called aniline leather. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I've heard of that.
Aniline leather. Now, with aniline leather, complete opposite to pigmented leather is it's completely porous, it's absorbent. So think of it like paper. You spill anything on it, it's going to soak right through.
Yeah.
Right? That's aniline leather, right? And aniline leather is very commonly used in furniture, a lot of handbags and things like that.
Yeah.
Right? Have aniline leather, and because it does not have any paint, right? It has a very, very soft touch and feel to it, but at the same time, it develops and builds character and patina very, very quickly.
Exactly.
Right? So it's got that age, used in, lived in look very, very quickly. Right? So aniline leather has to be protected if you don't want staining on it.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Now, a halfway house between these two is something called as semi-aniline leather. Now, as the name suggests, semi-aniline means it's sort of got the best of both worlds, right? It's got a little bit of primer, paint, and top coat, so it's got some level of protection, but the pores are not completely covered. They're there, right? So, like with aniline leather, it would soak in straight away. With semi-aniline, you almost have to rub it in and for it to soak in.
Got it.
Right? Now, all these three different types of leather have got the grain, the smooth side at the top, and the furry part at the bottom.
Got it.
Okay. Now, with aniline leather, if you grab sandpaper, and just start sanding it down, you'll get to a point where the surface has got a bit of a nap to it, right? But the grain structure is still quite visible. That type of leather is called nubuck leather. Right? So your Timberland boots, right? That's nubuck leather.
Okay.
Right?
Cool.
Now, imagine this hide is sliced again, right? And it's got the furry bits on both sides. What type of leather do you think that would be?
Ooh, like suede?
Yeah, hang on, absolutely. So that's suede, right? Now, suede and nubuck obviously are just like aniline leather. They've just got the dye, right? They're porous, they're absorbent, right? So that's nubuck, that's suede. Cool. Now, this is where we start getting into the funny business with leather, right? So, as we spoke about earlier, the lower down you go on the skin, the fibers are not as dense. So that affects the tear resistance of the material, right? Because the fibers are not as densely populated, they're a bit further away, so it's easier to tear and so on and so forth, right?
Getting more delicate.
That's it. So obviously, here the leather is sliced again, right? So you still get suede, but just because we know that lower down you go, the tear resistance is not the same. For that reason, I'm going to call it low quality suede or lower quality suede.
Got it.
Right? Now this lower quality suede is either just sold off as suede, or what they do is, imagine this is your suede, right? They'll develop an artificial coating, polyurethane coating, that looks just like pigmented leather, right? It's a very thin film, right? And they'll just glue that onto this suede. So it's like a very thin foil that's glued onto it.
Whoa.
Right? Made out of polyurethane, right? So to the naked eye, to the untrained eye, you're thinking, this is just this.
Yeah.
But that's not that, right? That's PU leather. Yeah. And the issue with this type of leather is quite often over a certain period of time, this PU coating starts peeling off, right? And you can start seeing the suede bit underneath, but you can't really restore it. There's not much you can do with it.
Okay.
Right? So these are like lower end sofas, lower end sort of steering wheels and things like that. That's where you'd find a lot of this.
Okay.
Right?
That's
With
awesome.
me so far? Yeah?
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay.
Tons
Now,
of information.
by the time you've sliced up all of these bits, what you're left with is still suede, but it's like powder.
Oh, wow.
right? All this is just like powder and just
Like fibers?
Yeah, fibers. That's what it is, basically. Right? All these fibers, right, would literally just get thrown into a big drum, right? And they'll add some chemicals to bond all of these fibers together, right? And then these fibers are again rolled into sheets of suede.
So it must be like a slurry mixture.
Yeah.
That's like poured, pressed, dried into like
Suede.
another version of
Another version of suede,
Yeah.
right? But this is usually quite tough and quite hard because it does not have the same level of flexibility as this one here or any other the other parts, right?
Yep.
And then obviously what they do is they grab this whole same PU coating, they glue that on top of that, right?
Yeah.
And this type of leather is called bonded.
That's bonded leather. Interesting.
Right? So it's just bonded together.
Okay.
Right? Bonded leather is usually a lot tougher, right? It doesn't have the same level of flexibility.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So very cool. It almost seems like every single layer is being used at some degree until you get to this, and it's basically like a slurry mixture that's made into like a sheet leather.
Now, finally, at the end of all of this, when you've just got this polyurethane coating,
Yep.
right? Imagine that's your polyurethane coating.
Yep.
In these two types of leather, it's glued to some bit of leather, right? But on the other side, when this is just glued to a piece of fabric or a backing material of some sort,
Yep.
right? That is your vinyl, PVC,
Yeah.
PU, fake,
It's plastic. It's
vegan, Tesla, call it whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
That's where you end up, right?
Yeah.
But these are just fancy names for, basically they should, the leather council and the leather industry around the world is basically saying that with these things, don't put the word leather at the end of it because it's got 0% leather in it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But obviously, leather as a material has a lot of advantages. People do like it. It's associated with luxury and durability and all of that. So people, obviously, manufacturers do put the name leather. Like Mercedes, they'd call things like MB Tex leather. They had various different names for it.
Pleather, we've heard from BMW.
Leather, right? Of course, there is an agenda against the leather industry. The automotive manufacturers are actively looking for other materials, alternative materials that offer the same benefits as leather. And I think that is going to change. Leather is still going to be around in the long run. I think there is a space for it, but I think it's going to be in sort of the premium cars. But right now, out in the market, what you see is a lot of that, right? A lot of that, and you get a mixture of the two as well. So sometimes you'll have the base of the seat, like anything that comes into direct body contact, that would be genuine leather. But your door cards, your glove box covers, the back of the seats and everything could be that, right?
True.
Or it could just be entirely that, especially with electric cars, Teslas and things like that. It's that, right? So now you understand what the surface is.
Yes.
It makes it easier to understand why would you condition something like this? Because a conditioner is ideally you want it to penetrate over time, because with leather it's about the balance of moisture and oil that gives it the softness, the flexibility, the elasticity, right? So a conditioner at some point during the leather's life is necessary, right? But with this, you don't really need it.
That's true.
But what you need is prevention against dye transfer, friction damage, all of that, which you also need on leather. But here, I think just a cleaner and a protection against that would be enough.
Exactly. Yeah, so the word leather and conditioner in the detailing world, it creates a lot of friction because the word leather we use, and we know it's not really leather, it's vinyl, it's plastic. There's an argument to be made with that. And the word conditioner, also, again, you know, it's already coated, it's already protected, it's plastic, you don't need to condition it. So, going into that, we're going to go into some of the Geist products and see, okay, well, let's protect an actual car seat that's pretty gross and dirty, that's in a vehicle, and use his products to clean it and protect it, or if you want to say condition, you can, but essentially it's protection and preservation.
That's it.